All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm Walter Alcorn, Chair of the Nbtc WMATA Committee. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our April 21st Nbtc WMATA Committee meeting. I'd like to note that our starting time is 5:06 p.m. And this meeting is being live streamed to allow our listening audience to be able to watch through YouTube Live. And we do have one committee member that is participating remotely. Mr. Letourneau is participating remotely for a personal reason, and he might be participating that way because he's smarter than the rest of us, but at least for personal reasons. I'd like to ask, do we have an in-person quorum? Yep. Okay. So before we get started, I'd also like to recognize the work of Nbtc program analyst Ramada Williams. Great. Who compiled some transit safety research facts that Nbtc has included as part of our Transit Tuesday tweets. Thank you very much for doing that. That's very helpful. I think as we all struggle and worry about safety of our transit system, I think it's important to keep in mind the context of that, and transit is the safest mode of travel. So the data that you pulled together is very helpful and reminds us all of that. So thank you for doing that. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to turn to the first item on the agenda. That's our January 20 Nbtc WMATA Committee meeting minutes summary. Do any committee members have any changes to that summary? Okay.
I do not, but I do want for the record to say they're very well drafted.
All right. Very good. Okay. Any changes? No other comments. Okay, we'll consider those approved. All right, so let's move to the second item. This is a presentation from WMATA staff on WMATA's bus priority program. This is agenda item number 2. We've invited WMATA staff to brief the committee on WMATA's bus priority program. And just as a reminder, in early 2020, Nbtc endorsed the Bus Transformation Project, which was a framework to transform the bus system across the region. Giving buses priority on streets was a key component of that study, and WMATA's Bus Priority Program is an outgrowth of that effort. The program aims to improve bus service and equity by increasing bus speeds, and not illegally, like efficiency. So, many of these bus priority improvements require extensive coordination with state and local agencies who are often the roadway owners where these improvements take place. In the spirit of coordination, I am pleased to introduce Radhika Chowdhury, Director of Bus Priority in the Office of Business Transformation at WMATA. He'll give us a brief update on the program and its work across the region and in Virginia. All right. So
that's me.
That's all you. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Rockets, all yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to come and provide a quick update on the bus transformation project and specifically the work related to bus priority, what we're doing in Northern Virginia, and then also hopefully we'll come out of this meeting with more opportunities for partnership in Northern Virginia. Okay. So the bus transformation project was an 18-month study that was undertaken with the goal to transform bus into a fast, frequent, reliable, affordable system that feels unified and advances transit equity. This map is basically where the unified system comes from. Right now, there are 9 transit providers in our region that provide bus service, which is great. 5 of them are in Northern Virginia. It's exciting. There's a lot of opportunities for our bus riders, but it's also confusing. And it's also a little less intuitive if you are coming from out of town and looking for a bus ride. So that's where the whole unified system came from. And if you go to the next slide. And part of the reason we want to improve bus is also the demographics of who rides Metro bus. If you look at Virginia demographics, 65% of Metro bus riders are people of color versus 31% of Metro Rail riders. And this difference is even more marked when you look at low-income riders. 33% of the Metro bus riders in Virginia are low-income versus only 6% of Metro Rail. So when you think about who's riding it, that's where we are really invested in improving bus service. And it's across the region. It's the same kind of demographics that we're seeing across the region, and we want to, and the pandemic kind of reinforced that understanding. So the bus transformation project involved an extensive public engagement process over that 18-month period, but consistently people came out and asked for frequent bus service that was more reliable and faster. And we do say reliable more than speedier, because speed always has the connotation of unsafe. So, and reliability is where we really want to make the improvements, because people don't care if the trip is 30 minutes or 35 minutes. What they really want is consistently 30 minutes or consistently 35 minutes, so they can plan their life around it. So buses have been facing en route challenges over the last 10 years or 15 years now. Between 2008 and 2018, bus speeds consistently dropped. It dropped 9%. It went from an average of 11 miles per hour to 10 miles per hour. But that did result in an increase of about 30 million in operating costs. And it's, the causes are not, most of it is stuff that we can't control. It's things like increased congestion, it's Uber and Lyft, and there's a lot more freight delivery, there's lots more Amazon trucks. All of them are on our curbsides and blocking buses. So, so if you go to the next slide. So with all of this in mind, and these are not challenges that just Metro bus faces, these are shared challenges for all bus providers. So with that background, these were the 4 strategies that the bus transformation project developed: frequent and convenient bus service, bus priority on roadways, improved customer experience, and a task force to implement the strategy. And I will focus on the bus priority piece today, because that's what my team does. So moving on to the next slide. Actually, I think one of the recommendations of this of the bus transformation project was the bus priority team and the program CIP to do the work. And that's when my team was formed in mid-2020. And since then, we've been working extensively with DDOT and Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Northern Virginia on bus lanes, TSP, queue jumps. And I'll talk about all of these a lot more in detail after this. But a few other initiatives here are also enforcement policies that establish bus priority. And then the last one is regional congestion mitigation efforts, which really that was again a regional item. We are here prepared to support when that happens for the region, but right now Ramada is not really leading that effort. So, not sure how familiar everyone is with what bus priority is and why we need it. So as I mentioned before, there are a lot of causes that slow our buses down. There's traffic congestion, there's signal delays, there's delays at stops, as well as, those are the 3. So for all of them, this graph, the line that you see, the blue line over there, that's actually a graph. And it shows a situation where because of traffic congestion, a bus is running at 8 miles per hour. Then it gets to a signal, it slows down, it stops. Then it accelerates, goes up to about 7, 8 miles again, comes to a bus stop, comes to a stop. then goes, and if you're lucky on your ride, you might get to free flow. That would take you to about 20 miles per hour. So that's where the challenges are with our bus speeds. But a toolbox for bus priority includes treatments for all of them. So if there's traffic congestion, you could have dedicated bus lanes, which is, of course, what everyone thinks about when you think about bus priority. And bus lanes need to be enforced, because that's something that happens as we've been seeing more and more bus lanes around the region. People are just parking in it and stopping, dropping a package off. I'm only here for a minute. And automated helps reduce that perception of bias or even real bias. At signals, we can do transit signal priority, we can do queue jumps, and at bus stops. Oh, another thing that's causing the delays is as these bus routes get older, somebody from the community comes in and says, I want a bus stop. So you add a bus stop, suddenly there's a bus stop on each block. And at some point, we need to kind of go back and take a look and say, this needs to be rebalanced. We need to make sure that they're evenly spaced and we aren't stopping every block. Or we have skip stop services, which is kind of 9 series buses in DC. Like the S9 is a limited stop series and S2 stops everywhere. So there are ways to treat that. And then we're also looking at all-door boarding, and we're looking at floating bus stops, which is where there's parking, then you have a bus stop that's extended, it's a curb extension, and then the bus doesn't have to weave in and out of traffic. So lots of tools, not all of them that WMATA can do, but there are a bunch of tools that we can use, and we have been coordinating with jurisdictions to work on it. So there's a lot of progress on bus priority in the region. If you just go back to the last one, thank you. And of course, Metroway is first on the corner there. That was also the first in the region, and also the project that I got started in bus priority on, because I was a Potomac Yard planner at Alexandria in the mid-2000s. So that's where I got started with bus priority. I'm really proud of that corridor, and so many others have followed since. So good news for the region, still a lot more to do. If you go to the next slide, please. Some of our other projects that we're working on, there's transit signal priority, which a bus arrives at a signal, they either get an extended green if the light's about to change to red, or you get a truncated red if they arrive on red. You can have queue jumps, which if there's a dropped lane on the other side of the intersection, the bus gets a head start. There's a special signal and the bus gets a head start, goes ahead of the other traffic so they don't waste time merging back into traffic. Violation detection system, that's something we are working on. We have an RFP out on the street these days trying to get a vendor. And that's basically, it sends a video of violations to the jurisdiction. We only send the videos. WMATA does not enforce because we are not the enforcing agency. And all-door boarding, that's something that we've been working on as well and will be piloting. Yeah, so these are, TSP is our oldest program, and it's our most mature program as well. We have about 250 intersections in our region. About 20% of those are in Northern Virginia. We have them on Route 1, Beauregard, Vandon, and then Route 7 and Duke Street is our newest corridor that we implemented this year. We are adding more on Route 7, and of course, Arlington County is working on Langston Boulevard and Columbia Pike as well. So we'll be working with them on that. And this is a video of what's happening with all-door boarding. So this is a pilot that we're working on. We plan to have about 3 corridors in the region, 1 in each jurisdiction. And this video basically says it much better than I can.
Oh,
So, so this is a video from Nbta, but this also full disclosure. This is 3 doors. Ours is 2 doors, so we won't see as much of the benefit. But still, huge difference. And we are hoping to pilot these as the new fare boxes come in. We've had some delays with supply chain issues, but hopefully early next year, because we thought it was going to be early this year. Things kept getting pushed back. But early next year, we'll have 3 pilots and pilots on 3 routes, and one of them will be in Northern Virginia. We're still finalizing the route on that. And moving on, this is the violation detection system that is coming to DC in 2023. We will be capturing the images, but all the data will be transferred to the jurisdiction. They will be issuing the tickets. In other places where they've done violations, where they've done automated enforcement, they found that it can increase bus speeds by 20 to 30% within the extents of the bus lane. So we are pretty optimistic about it. And what we are doing is also trying to, because our bus lanes are not as extensive, our system will also enforce bus stops. So it will be bus stops and bus lanes, and we'll be reporting on metrics over the next year to see how well it works. This would start in early 2023 as well. DC is also doing their own violation detection or camera enforcement simultaneously. So they're going to put cameras on all their buses as well as some stationary cameras. So it's going to be interesting. They're about 3 months out in front of us, ahead of us.
in Virginia, we're a Dillon rule state, so we only have the authority given to us by the General Assembly. And there is this very strong anti-camera contingent in the GA that restricts the jurisdiction's use of cameras to enforce different things, red light stops, school zones, etc. And I'm just stating a fact. I'm not advocating for it. In fact, I bristle at this restriction, but just for the record.
Yeah, Commissioner Myers, right. There's also the issue of reciprocity, which I know continues to be a question with automatic
Correct.
traffic enforcement.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you. Keep going.
Yeah, I think I have maybe one more slide. Yeah, and I think I just want to end with none of the work that we are doing can be done by just Ramada, and everything that we're doing needs a lot of coordination, and regional coordination really is the cornerstone of a successful bus priority program. And we've been very fortunate. Our partners have been very enthusiastic about it, and we've been able to convince some of the not very enthusiastic folks as well. And then I also want to note there are incremental benefits that can be realized as we layer these bus priority treatments on. So just adding 3 blocks of a bus lane is not enough. And you want to also add transit signal priority along that bus route. You want to add queue jumps along it. So the more that you layer on, the more benefits that you get and you accrue, and you can actually see some noticeable benefits. Otherwise, you get, with queue jumps, you get 12 seconds of benefit of travel time saving at an intersection. It's a cheap measure, but it's also 12 seconds. But if you have 10 intersections with 12 seconds, that adds up. And then you save another minute on a bus lane. It all adds up with the number of trips and savings and things like that. So that was one last thing. And then we keep doing analytics. We have a great team at Metro that does the analytics and performance monitoring, and it's making the case for continued regional investment. So when DC implemented the bus lanes on 14th Street and M Street and MLK, we did some analysis and found that it improves median speeds by 3 to 6%, but it also improves the slowest speeds by 27%. And that makes a big difference because if the slowest buses are coming towards the median, your trip gets more reliable. And that's a huge, huge benefit. Next steps are bus planning and strategic planning teams are working on the redesign of the bus network. And we are continuing to work with our different jurisdictional partners on bus priority. That's really all I have. But
Well,
yeah.
Raka, thank you very much. I'll have one question and see if any committee members have questions. On the metrics, I'm curious, improved median speeds by 3 to 16%. Is there any metric, does that mean basically you get there 3 to 16% faster? Or do you just get to the next stoplight 3 to 6% faster? I mean, honestly, how are those measured?
I think it's end to end of where the bus lane corridor is.
Okay, so it is through the route.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and these bus lane corridors are about, I think that it's on that map. I can't really see it, but they aren't very long. So I think one of them is 4,000 feet. That's the one I can see. Or the 14th Street is 2,000 feet, I think. So they aren't very long, but then 14th Street also has about 4 or 5 queue jumps along it. Not within the extent of the bus lane, but further south. So all of that helps. But yeah, these travel time savings are for just that small segment.
Okay, all right, that's
Yeah.
very helpful, because certainly from a passenger perspective, you don't want to just go faster for a little distance and then, take just as long. The perception's helpful.
Yeah.
But hopefully the actual time is less.
Yeah, this also was, these bus lanes are also in the most congested corridors, in the most congested segments of the corridors. If you ever take the 14th Street bus line was my line, and I used to actually get out and walk it because it was faster. So they put it in the most congested segment of the corridor.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any questions from committee members? Mr. DeFrente and Mr. Snyder.
Questions about DC. I used to work there and take the bus all the time, but do we have any sense of how much now when I go and I see bus lanes, it's a marked visual difference, but do we have any sense of how much of the effective bus lane work has been done in DC? 14th Street, I know, and and I've seen others, but does it look like DC is sort of 20% there or 40% there, or is there any way to say that or not?
I think they are only about 2 miles in, and they have plans for about 50 in the next 6 years. So,
Okay.
so they've staffed up the bus priority team. I think they have 8 full-time team members who are working on it now. They've got, I think, 65 million to work on bus priority. So yeah, they're pretty early, but they have a lot in the plans.
65 million's more than we've got, so we wish we had the virtuous circle that.
Which is, they also have a lot more congestion. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Snyder.
Sure. Could we turn to this slide for a minute? Because I want to figure out what the recommendation is in areas where you don't have dedicated bus lanes, where you simply can't. It's an urban area. You're not going to expand the overall footprint of the highway. So one area I saw was bus priority, but then I looked at that picture and I'm thinking, if I'm a driver, I would be confused as heck about which light's mine and which one's the bus. And can you, in terms of, maybe I'm just a bad driver, I don't know, but in terms of bus priority for getting through lights? Is there an electronic, like I think, like emergency vehicles have the ability to change the light, right? So is that, I see that you're only showing bus priority queue jump. First time I've heard of that, but interesting. But how about if you combine the ability to change the light to serve the bus, and then you did all door boarding? How much would you save from that? I mean, I'm trying to prioritize here. Not everything is going to work everywhere. So under particular circumstances, what gives you the best improvement in travel time?
So the biggest bang for your buck is probably queue jumps.
Is what?
Queue jumps, which is if you
Yeah.
go maybe a slide back. Oh, the next one.
Right.
Next one. No, next one. Yeah. Yeah, this one. So if you look at image 2, that's what a queue jump is. So there's a special signal. Usually it helps when there's a right turning lane, there's a dropped lane in front. And Arlington has a lot of, I'm sure there are streets like that in Arlington that could be thought of. I can't really think of it off the top
So
of my head, but
Arlington
that's
already
interesting.
has that. So
Alexandria has it.
Alexander, how's it working?
Fine.
It works well?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So drivers aren't confused and you're not getting right-hand turn in front of buses that are also jumping the queue. You're not creating that. Okay, well, that's interesting.
What's up,
Um,
BRT?
How long have you been there?
And then do you have the ability, as one of the tools that you're talking about, the ability to electronically change the light?
Yes. And all our buses, 100% of our buses are equipped with transit signal priority.
Sure.
But it also requires intersection equipment, and it requires the jurisdiction to say, okay, yeah, this is a route we want to signalize. We want to prioritize buses. And that's where Duke Street was the latest. So the bus arrives at the intersection, it calls the intersection. The intersection sends, there's the whole communication thing, and then it changes the light. So it gives you an extended green. So if the light's about to change and become red, it extends that green phase of the signal and gets the bus through.
Right.
Or if it arrives on a red, then it calls for it and it shortens the red phase. So we have that capability. 100% of our metro buses have it. I know Dash has it. Art, I think, is working on it. And Arlington County is working on adding that too. So,
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Snyder. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate the
you.
presentation, very informative.
Thank you.
Good discussion.
great. Thanks so much.
Okay, so let's move on to item number 3 on the agenda. We have a presentation from Nbtc staff. Provides an overview of how WMATA is funded and how that funding works specifically in Virginia. So hopefully this is useful for commissioners, especially those that are new or somewhat new like me. This is an important and timely presentation as the WMATA Board, Commission, and the region start to discuss the FY 2022 operating budget gap earlier this year. So, Andrew, I think you have a slide deck, and then there'll be opportunity for discussion after the presentation. So, yep, turn it over to you.
All right. So as I dive into how WMATA is funded, how the funding flows in Virginia, I'm going to give a brief overview of the WMATA capital budget, the WMATA operating budget, and then talk about how that funding flows within Virginia and then to WMATA. So starting with the capital budget, it has seen significant growth, as shown on the figure on the right, which is more than doubled in terms of annual expenditures between fiscal 15 and 21. The capital budget growth is to address the long overdue state of good repair needs. WMATA's capital budget is funded by a mixture of federal, state, and local funds, and legislation established in 2018 in Virginia and across the region established the regional dedicated capital funding, which has allowed WMATA to leverage that funding stream by bond. That has allowed the ramp up that you see. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act also increases federal capital support that will allow WMATA to continue to sustain the capital program's momentum, and I'll talk about that a little further in the presentation. In fiscal 23, the WMATA capital budget totaled $2.42 billion, and that's in the stacked bar chart on the left. This was 39% debt funded, 41% state and local funded, and 20% federal funded. That federal funding in purple at the bottom is mostly formula funding, federal formula funding, as well as a few other grants. There's also the PRIA funding in the darker purple. That is the Passenger Rail Investment and Improvement Act funding, which is essentially extra federal funding earmarks for WMATA that does have a match. That was included in the infrastructure bill, so will be continued. It's important to note that the funding here, other than PRIA, for the federal funding, does not include any additional funding from the infrastructure bill. WMATA is awaiting additional clarification before those numbers are changed, but we would expect that to go up. State and local funding in green is the next category. This is the funding from Virginia, DC, and Maryland. The biggest is that $500 million, the regional dedicated funding. It is split $154 million for Virginia, $167 for Maryland, and $178 for DC. Given the ramp up in the program, at least the proposed 23 budget had about $100 million of this as debt service payments. And the rest of the dedicated capital funding in fiscal 23 would be used on a pay-as-you-go basis. As we move up the chart, you'll see the local match for PRIA funds that's split a third each way. And I'll talk about that a little later. The next category is the jurisdictional capital subsidies. That's in the dark green, and you can see how it is split and allocated on the right. This is mostly the state and local match for federal formula funds, and it's allocated according to the capital funding agreement. These increased by 3% for the grand total, and then are allocated according to each funding jurisdiction by applying board weighted formula. And you can see the result, what those numbers mean. There are, as category for reimbursables, this is a category for projects that WMATA is advancing but are sponsored and funded by a requesting jurisdiction. So you can think of that as like the Potomac Yard Station is funded by the city of Alexandria. And then, as I mentioned, dedicated funding capital debt is about 39% of the total here, and it is what is driving the expansion of the capital program. This $954 million would be bonded by WMATA and paid over the next few decades using dedicated funding revenues to make those debt service payments. And WMATA uses this debt funding to manage fluctuations in the annual capital expenditures, which gives the funding jurisdiction stability in their capital subsidies.
And Andrew, just a quick note that PRIA is for 10 years.
Yep.
When it was passed.
And actually, Andrew, let me jump in. So on this one.
Yep.
Some jurisdictions like Fairfax County do bond referenda as well.
Correct.
Where does that fit? Which category?
So that would fit in, and I will get that later in a complex spaghetti flow chart.
There we go.
But that basically, you are choosing to bond your capital payment.
So the 42.
So it's part of, it would be part of the 42.1, yeah. Because some jurisdictions may simply have pay it as you go. Some may bond. It's a mixture.
Yep.
But you cannot bond off.
Right. Thank you. Keep going.
So this figure is from WMATA. This shows from the fall. So this is pre-infrastructure bill. This shows the state of good repair backlog as it was calculated in 2016 and as it is projected to decrease given various 6-year capital improvement plans. It does go down, obviously, as the backlog is dug through. But there are 3 points that I'd like to convey. The first is that it will take at least a decade of sustained investments to address that backlog. And while that work is underway, it's important to maintain and sustain assets so that they do not slip into a state of disrepair. The second is that the dedicated funding debt drives the investments, as I mentioned previously. Something that this committee and staff have been very tuned to is that with the addition of federal funds from the infrastructure bill, dedicated capital funding is expected to be extended and then be exhausted somewhere around fiscal 30, and this of course could change. And so what exhausted means is that around that time period, nearly all of the annual dedicated capital funds would go to paying debt service and no additional bonds could be issued. So at some point before that happens, the region will have to have a capital discussion, but that's much later discussion to have. And the third is that this is just for state of good repair. So this does not include expansion or major enhancements. So there are additional needs like transitioning to a zero emission bus fleet or capacity improvements that have to do with alternatives for the blue, orange, silver study, other things like that. Those are above and beyond what you're seeing here. Let's go to the next slide, Sophie.
And just for the new folks, I mean, this backlog of state of good repair is for projects that were basically overlooked for 40 years.
Right.
So,
And the
Yeah, big
bonding,
backlog. Yeah.
bonding the dedicated funding was the plan when that
to
was
address,
introduced.
self-address.
Yeah.
all that.
Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to switch to the operating budget. In general, the operating budget funds expenses associated with the three modes at WMATA, and that's rail, bus, and access. Metro access is paratransit. The operating budget totaled $2.247 billion in expenses, and by far Metro Rail was the largest expenses by mode. It's important to remember that 70% of the operating budget goes to personnel expenses. And typically the operating budget is funded by fare and non-fare revenues and then jurisdictional subsidies, and there is typically no federal support. In recent years, of course, there has been federal aid that has helped plug holes in the operating budget. And in 2018, that transportation funding addressed capital funding with the dedicated capital funding. It did not address operating funding. It did put a 3% legislative cap on Virginia's operating subsidy growth, which we'll talk about a little later. Next slide. So in fiscal 23, the approved operating budget was 30% federal funds, 53% state and local, and 18% passenger and other revenues. Passenger and other revenues is basically fares and then non-fare revenues. Fares depends on the mode, which of course fare revenue right now is below pre-pandemic levels. Pre-pandemic, Metro Rail brought in the most fare revenue and had a fare box recovery of around 50%, 50%. Non-fare revenues are things like advertising, parking, other sources. Many of these are linked to ridership, but not all of them. And ridership recovery is expected to be gradual. And so in future years, the amount of fare revenue is expected to grow. And the pandemic-induced declines in the blue, the fare box revenues, is what the purple, the federal COVID relief, is largely offsetting. As we move to the green here, the state and local funding. This is from Virginia, Maryland, and DC. These are the jurisdictional operating subsidies that we talk so much about. The breakdown is shown on the right. At a high level, this is expenses minus revenues that then get allocated out to the funders. The federal funds are the one-time COVID relief funds. These will be exhausted in fiscal 24, and when they're exhausted, there's a gap.
And just also too, so people understand, it's a it's sort of a complex algorithm that calculates all this, stations, miles, ridership,
And as Mr. Smedberg mentioned, here's the allocation in a much more simplistic format. Right now, things are allocated on an alternative formula, which is approved by the board in order to comply with the legislative 3% caps, operating caps in Virginia and Maryland. Those caps are specific to Virginia and Maryland's totals. And they basically set a maximum rate of growth for the base total to 3%. And then there are various exclusions on top of that that can bring it above 3%. The green boxes show how it works. So you start with your prior year base, you add that 3%. It's important to note that's Virginia, Maryland, and DC. In Virginia, though, there is no Virginia payer. there's a Virginia subtotal, there are 6 cities and counties who pay and add up to that subtotal. So then that amount of subsidy is essentially sub-allocated by a share of the formulas that Mr. Spenberg mentioned within the Virginia jurisdiction. Then the historical formulas, broadly speaking, include a number of factors for each mode that represent transit service consumed or demanded. Then you add the exclusions on top of that. These vary each year, but include things like safety, federal mandates, new services like Silver Line Phase 2, Potomac Yard, and then that adds up to the total subsidy. In 2020, the Nbtc 3% cap working group was tasked by the Virginia General Assembly to report on the cap. And they found that it was a useful tool, recommended no immediate changes, and the working group did note several unintended consequences with its implementation. What? Okay, this is the spaghetti chart I was mentioning earlier. So this is our attempt at illustrating the mechanics of how funding flows for WMATA in Virginia. And we've put it in some boxes about the major sort of organizations where that flows. But the first place to start is the regional gas tax.
Hey, Andrew.
Yeah.
This is Matt. Before we get too deep into this, can we just go back to that last one for a second? Because I feel like I should make a point, which is, if you all remember the discussion we were having about changes in service that occurred during the year, the sort of WMATA has handled that different ways, but the most recent practice was to actually make those changes during the course of the year. So when Andrew was talking about essentially the subsidy gets allocated within Virginia, what that meant was if there was some sort of service changed on bus that resulted in, let's just say, Fairfax County getting more service and Arlington getting less, then the subsidy would be reallocated and changed during the middle of the fiscal year to reflect what was happening on the ground. And that is what I changed when I became finance chairman, because even though, from a year-to-year basis, there may be essentially some inaccuracies that develop over the course of the year, it was just really disruptive for the local governments to have significant changes to the subsidy formula in the middle of the year. So our practice going forward now is, once that's set, it's set for the whole fiscal year, and then it'll be reevaluated every year. And that's why during the course of the budget process this year, usually there's a chart that comes out early in the process that staff use, and then that chart ends up changing all over the place. And it actually was completely stable this year. And the numbers that the local government budget staff got in, whenever it was, Andrew, I don't remember, but it stayed the same all the way through the budget adoption, because that was one of the complaints that Paul and I had been hearing a lot from staff, which was how those numbers change around. So I just figured that's a good place to explain that with your additional context.
Absolutely. I think to Matt's point, one of the to sort of add to that, it's the local jurisdictions fund this annually, but it's appropriated annually, and so sort of certainty about what their subsidy is has been a major theme that we've heard throughout the course of many budget cycles. So I think I was going to start at the regional gas tax. That is the blue at the top. The DMV administers this. Amounts are withheld from the gross revenue collected in the Nbtc region by the Commonwealth and directed to the VRE Commuter Rail Operating Fund, CROC, and to the WMATA Capital Fund. That's the dedicated funding in Virginia. The net revenue of that flows to Nbtc, where it is allocated by formula to our jurisdictions and held in trust. Next slide, Sophie. So at DRPT on the top left, we have the Nbtc WMATA allocation. This is from the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund, otherwise referred to as state aid. This flows to Nbtc to assist the local funding jurisdictions in meeting their capital and subsidy commitments to WMATA. The middle box is the WMATA Capital Fund, the $154 million, Virginia's share of the regional dedicated funding. While it's managed at DRPT, most of this funding is funding sources from our 6 cities and counties, so they're collected locally. And as previously mentioned, there is a portion of the gas tax, that regional gas tax that flows here. There's also a line from the Virginia funding jurisdictions up to the dedicated funding, and that is the 27.1 million in local transportation funds that they provide into the fund that then flow back to WMATA. Further revenue sources are listed in the box, and DRPT provides this to WMATA as part of a grant agreement. And then lastly, DRPT provides the pre-match that match to the extra federal funding. They provide the pre-match on behalf of Virginia. This is the additional 150 million. The match is 50 for Virginia, and that is split a third, a third, a third. It comes off the top of the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund. Next slide. At Nbtc, we hold 2 major funding streams in trust for the jurisdictions: the regional gas tax, net those withholdings that I mentioned previously, and the state aid that flows from DRPT. For that state aid, DRPT contracts operating and capital assistance for WMATA with Nbtc. The state aid is used to assist the local jurisdictions to make their capital and operating subsidy commitments to WMATA. We allocate that funding using our subsidy allocation model formula. That is a regional approach to transit funding, which is established by resolution here at Nbtc. For the regional gas tax, we get that net amount, we allocate it out and hold it in trust. And then for both of those funding streams, the jurisdictions instruct Nbtc to make payments to WMATA on their behalf out of their respective trust fund balances. And that's that green box, hollow green box on the left. Slide. And then lastly, we have the 6 cities and counties. They're the primary funders. They're ultimately responsible for those capital and operating subsidies. They meet their obligations through a mixture of resources. As mentioned, they instruct Nbtc to make payments from their gas tax or state aid trust funds. They also use their local funds to pay WMATA. Sources here commonly used include general fund revenues, as Chair Alcorn mentioned, general obligation bonds, but only for capital. Some use their NBTA 30% funds, and there are also other transportation funds available to vary by jurisdiction. And as I mentioned previously, it's important to remember that this is annually budgeted for and annually approved in each jurisdiction's annual budget. Okay, so I have gone over some very dense content. So I'll try to wrap it up with some key messages that are a bit higher level. First, for capital, with dedicated funding and the recent infrastructure bill, we're in a really good place for WMATA's capital funding for state of good repair needs. The additional federal funding from that infrastructure bill provides WMATA with additional resources to address those needs. It extends the life of the dedicated funding. And as I mentioned previously, leading up to that exhaustion, we'll have to have a renewed conversation in the region, but that's later this decade. Beyond state of good repair, WMATA's needs are largely unfunded. As I mentioned previously, this includes things like zero emission bus, blue and silver study, expansion, things like that. The infrastructure bill does offer discretionary federal funding opportunities. WMATA intends to take advantage of them. But really beyond that, it's too early for us to speak to those any further. WMATA is sort of looking at that, and I think hopefully we'll see more soon. So the capital funding here is largely good news. Operating is where the challenges, the immediate challenges lie. So in the Virginia context, state aid and regional gas tax are flexible. Our local jurisdictions can use them to meet either their capital or their operating commitments. Within moving to the WMATA context, though, in terms of what we've just seen, fare revenues obviously are tied to ridership, and they are down with a gradual post-pandemic recovery. So this is a huge, immediate, short-term problem. Within that context, the amount that WMATA can increase, or the 3% cap on operating does constrain the amount that WMATA can increase local subsidies. And then when the aid expires, there is a gap between revenue. There will be an operating funding gap and revenue growth from fares and subsidies are limited. So I'll talk about how that works in the next agenda item. that concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Just a quick question. Regional gas tax, was that affected by Maryland's recent gas tax holiday? Do you know? Or was that not part of the gas
So
tax?
the regional gas tax that here are literally the Nbtc districts, so it's in Virginia.
So it's not in
So it's
Maryland?
not
That's correct.
affected, and also just
Yeah.
to take one step further, it is not also affected by any of the current conversations about causing statewide gas tax.
So it's not.
So we are not, it's not on the table.
Thank you. Very good. Other questions from committee? All right. Totally clear. Thank you, Andrew.
We're more than happy to take questions offline.
The surprise. quiz.
Of course, we were interrupting you. with questions or comments. Thank you very much, Andrew. Very helpful. Let's move on, going from the theoretical to the actual budget. Agenda item number 4. Our last few committee and commission meetings, Nbtc staff and WMATA board members gave updates regarding the FY 2024 operating budget gap. The size of the gap has changed, and Nbtc staff are going to walk through some of these changes and assumptions. Back to you, Andrew.
All right. So this figure hopefully is familiar. This shows
Changed that recently.
this shows the actual budgeted and projected ridership for WMATA when compared to pre-pandemic levels for fiscals 19 through 25. And so on the left, you can see that ridership dropped with the pandemic, and we're somewhere at fiscal 22 amended looking towards fiscal 23. And so that gradual recovery is what we're looking towards. This figure was previewed and discussed with the WMATA board. These are the assumptions that went into the budget. As WMATA looks towards future budgets, of course, this could change as more information is collected. Ridership recovery has significant impacts on the future recovery of fare revenues. Let's go to the next one. And so we've reviewed the preliminary 24 operating gap with the committee in previous meetings. That number was at the time of 519 million, so it has gone down, fortunately. We'd like to go over very briefly what we know right now. And so, as I mentioned, ridership and fare recovery is expected to be gradual. There's a lack of certainty about what the new normal will look like. The other major trend that's happening is that expense growth is exceeding revenue growth. I think this is something the board members talked to a little bit in previous commission or committee meetings. Some of the primary drivers here are inflation. Inflation is linked to the collective bargaining agreements, and there's also will be new services added like Silver Line Phase 2. Revenue growth is limited by the slow recovery in fare revenues and non-fare revenues, and the Virginia and Maryland 3% caps that constrain that operating subsidy growth. Federal aid, as I mentioned, is what is plugging that gap between expenses and revenues, and when the aid is exhausted, that's where we see the funding gap form. The updates that I want to share are that the WMATA board, WMATA staff at the direction of the board found 43 million in additional savings in the approved fiscal 23 budget. So that was when compared to proposed. There was also an additional 120 million in COVID aid that was awarded in March to WMATA, and that is from the American Rescue Plan additional assistance funding. Go to the next slide, you can see what that looks like. We showed an earlier version of this slide. So what this is WMATA's annual actual budgeted proposed or planned total operating expenses for fiscals 21 through 24. 23 has been updated to show what was recently approved. Fiscal 24 here is the gap year. This is WMATA's assumptions from the fall. So this is numbers from WMATA. What I've done is simply updated that the gap is smaller because we got more aid, that 120 million, and found some savings. So undoubtedly, as sort of we move towards the fall, this figure will change when WMATA updates various assumptions. So I do want to caveat that a lot, but the gap is a little smaller. Again, it could change. The lighter green on the bottom is the fare revenue, the subsidies in the middle, and then the federal aid that is being exhausted is in dark green and the gap is in red. Yeah, that's concludes.
All right, well, before I
Smaller
open it
number.
for questions, I just wanted to see if Paul, you or Matt had anything else you wanted to add. Thank you very much, Andrew, for that. That's someone.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing, really to add at this point. Greg, correct me if I'm wrong. I think Paul and I were meeting with business leaders yesterday, and I think bus and rail is coming, especially bus is doing pretty well, relatively speaking. And rail is definitely, ticking up. I think the real wild card is obviously, the federal government, what they decide to do. It looks like the majority right now will be once in the office per pay period, potentially, but then there are other agencies that are back, some are 5 days a week, some are 2 or 3 days. I mean, so it's all over the map, but there's no consistency yet. But, things are definitely picking up. I mean, the key is going to be, getting people out of their cars. As Matt can tell you, he went 7 tenths of a mile in 20 minutes yesterday trying to get home.
I called Paul. That's how he knows what I was.
I was tracking him with that new bus camera. No.
Well, it was those damn bus lanes. I'm telling you, they were killing me in DC.
So hopefully there is, I think once people really are back and everyone is starting to come back, hopefully, now the projections, who knows, where we'll end up. I mean, but I think it's fair to assume that, at least for the first year anyway, it would be extremely optimistic to think that we'll be pre-pandemic levels. So I think it's going to probably take a while. So.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. Matt, do you have anything you want to add?
No, maybe only that this is only showing through 24, but obviously the situation continues beyond that. And I've said before, we would have ended up in a shortfall scenario anyway, even without what happened. Obviously, it was heavily accelerated by the drop in ridership. But we were in a scenario where expenditures were going to outpace revenues eventually, and that was accelerated. So that continues beyond 24. So we're going to kind of be in this same situation. We've talked about it before, because of the provisions related to labor that were part of the federal aid. We really can't come in for a soft landing. Unfortunately, we can't really do anything that impacts labor costs as long as we're still using the federal aid, which will run out sometime sort of mid-year after the next budget. So that's going to mean some difficult discussions in the fall, and it's going to be really challenging because we'll have a new general manager at that point who's sort of walking into this difficult fiscal scenario. And we've also talked about the fact that we're not unique. This is the same situation, almost the same exact timeline occurring with other major transit systems. So hopefully there'll be a kind of elevated national conversation about it at that time.
All right, Matt, thank you very much. Appreciate those insights. I have one question on this one too. The FY 2024 scenario, I have a different labor cost question. I know longer term compensation for many Metro employees is tied to basically inflation. Is that calculated for 2024 or is that still a TBD item? In other words, could that number go up now that we're seeing inflation much higher?
I think we're good through calendar year 23, aren't we, Greg? I think
so. There were some assumptions made for 24, but that's going to be reset. I think reevaluated.
Yeah, I think it's
23, I think.
Yeah, it's another year. I think we have Walter, and then negotiations will start early.
So at least half of FY '24 is set. That's a solid number, is that right?
I think, yeah, I mean, as solid as they can be.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But at least not affected by that contract. Yeah, okay.
When I think is, WMATA staff have repeatedly cited inflation as a risk factor, and I think as they update, more information is available this summer, we can, I think, have a better answer, but I think this number could change.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Mr. DeFranchi.
Can you say anything about the 43 million in savings? Because I think I kind of asked how much savings do we get, and it was 10 million. And if the 43 million is, service cuts, or if it's, is there anything you can summarize as to whether, I guess the question is partly, would you anticipate any chance of finding additional savings over the coming fiscal year 24?
Mr. Finance Chair?
Sorry, just to make sure I understand though, which 43 million are you referring to?
The cuts from last year, or the current
Oh.
one. Yeah.
Oh, what we did in the course of the budget?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's possible. I mean, that some of that was not replenishing certain positions that had been vacated based on ridership not being at 100%. So it's possible that some of that could happen. Also, there will be some savings, although not a lot, with the delays on Silverline Phase 2. Of course, I would much rather have Silverline Phase 2 operating than to save a little money. Most of the labor costs, though, are going to be expended because we had to hire on the schedule, assuming that it would be ready this summer. But there probably still will be some operating cost savings by not operating that. So yeah, you could see, some of those things, and that number may go down a little bit.
And Matt, I think it's fair to say, Matt, that, like your budgets, once you get past the personnel and healthcare costs and all that stuff, anything you're looking at cuts, it's on the margins.
Yeah.
I mean, but don't forget, if we don't address these issues, it wasn't all that long ago, the general manager proposed what people were calling the draconian budget. The only way you get the significant savings is you either got to close stations or severely cut back service. Those are really your only, because those labor costs are pretty much locked in. And, they don't want to do anything. So, it's, yeah. So that's it's going to be tough. And then we also have to think, yesterday when we had this roundtable with business leaders, we got to start thinking about past this, what is the new funding model going to look like for WMATA ultimately? Because the one we have now is not sustainable. It's not going to be sustainable for you all, the way it's set up. So we've got to really start thinking about that new model now.
And then numbers wise, 53% is projected, 65% is fiscal 24. I feel like is there 65% is still appropriate as a conservative estimate as to return? I feel like maybe I've read a post article or something that says there's a little higher percentage that's coming back, but it's hard because we gotta have all the trains, right?
Yeah.
In order to do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we just don't know what the new norm is going to be. There is no real, the rush hours are, instead of an hour and a half, 2 hours, now they're 3 hours and 3.5 hours. And people come in normal time, but then they're leaving early. Or they come in late and they're leaving at the normal time. So it's all over the place.
And I can help clarify, the 43 million in savings was when you compare the approved '23 budget to what was initially proposed.
Yeah, what the GM proposed,
What
we
the GM
we made
proposed.
reductions. We took out the most expensive fair policy proposal, which was the add value bonus. So that saved over 7 million. And then we had some other savings from some of the personnel stuff that I mentioned. And then we were able, because of PREA, we were able to move some costs over to capital that were being picked up with PREA funding that were part of the operating budget related to the IG's office.
In the original, the larger gap number was from the proposed budget, so it's so how you move it around. Yeah.
And just overall, you're looking at a multi-billion-dollar budget. So just,
How, I think we all agree that we have to have this new funding model. We need to start thinking about it and putting options down, trying to monetize those options with as many accurate assumptions as you can make, with understanding that those assumptions have confidence intervals that are different. But my question is, how far can we go with this before a new general manager is on board? Or,
I don't know. I'm not sure I'm quite getting.
well, you said we need to address and create a new funding model now.
Well, I mean,
I know,
yeah, because it took 3 years to get the dedicated funding.
I know.
Yeah.
My question is, I mean, the new general manager is going to have a significant influence on what those recommendations may be. Maybe not, I don't know, but I'm just asking.
Oh, no, I mean, it's going to be, the business community, the state level politicians, you all, I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, well, you remember just the dedicated funding.
I know.
I mean, it was like,
There was blood on the tracks.
yeah,
I got it.
it was,
I know,
yeah,
I know,
yeah.
I know.
Can you imagine?
That's going to make,
Yeah.
this is going to make that look like child's play.
Absolutely.
I know. This is almost a near-death existential.
Well, and we're aware of the pressure you all are gonna have, a lot of you are gonna have collective bargaining. That's gonna raise your costs a great deal, more pressures on your budget.
Yeah, I would recommend, one of the things I was doing this in my head is in our own jurisdictions, it's probably not a bad exercise to go through and calculate what percentage of your local funds are going to Metro, both operating and capital. And I think that's a good starting point. Understand, frankly, at least in the jurisdiction I represent, there's not a lot of elasticity, in terms of putting more money at the local level, at least coming from the real estate tax, the way that we're currently authorized to tax. So that's probably one start. Mr. Meyer, maybe something else that would be helpful is to start to pull together how it's done in other regions. How other regions provide sustainable funding for their transit systems, and maybe we can learn something.
And as you know, what complicates it is you got the 3 states. You got to negotiate. So we're sort of rare in that regard. One other, New York, Connecticut, Jersey, but it's 2 states. Yeah.
Mr. Snyder.
So what is the process for moving forward, and what is the role of NBTC at this point? When do we start looking at alternatives and options and beginning to look at things? And let me just state for the record again, and Paul's, I'm sure, very tired of hearing me saying that, but if you start closing either East Falls Church or West Falls Church, I have no political support for Metro, period. So, but beyond that, I think we all realize the situation that we're in. We're all committed to Metro. So what process do we use going forward? I don't think this can wait till the fall, frankly. I mean, when you're staring at this, it's almost irresponsible to just sit here and listen to these numbers. So what do we do?
Yeah.
What's the board doing and
And
how
I
do we?
personally think
interact?
there's a role for NBTC. Greg, in Maryland, that bill that Corman had in was sort of kind of starting to address the issue a little bit.
So
Yeah,
that was on the capital side.
capital side, but
Yeah,
still, at least
so
it was
just
something.
waiting for
Yeah,
the funding.
Maryland is starting to already,
Yeah.
So if I might just make a suggestion, I think we're kind of at a stage where those of us who are on our local boards are kind of liaisons on these issues. I think we really need to go back to our staffs and our colleagues and really, forcefully push the significance of this issue and start having the internal conversations within our jurisdictions about what each of us can afford and what we're able to do about it, and what those trade-offs are coming into the next budget season. Everybody's kind of adopting their 23 budgets in this time. And then usually the 24 budget discussion will start, in our case, it starts in July. I bet you it's probably the same for everybody. So that's the time to really be having, inserting this as an issue early, and maybe Nbtc can kind of be the clearinghouse, both at the staff level and, for all of us to sort of feel each other out and what we would be willing to do in the event that there is no more federal money coming and we're facing these kind of shortfalls. That's just a suggestion to get us started. Because I mean, as much as we've talked about this and said it, and I think everybody that's paying attention is aware of it at this point, ultimately this comes down to, what Metro doesn't fund itself. So it relies on other people to fund it, other than the revenue we generate. So it's almost not our decision in terms of the Metro Board's decision as to what we're going to do. We're going to do whatever we have to do to keep literally the lights on. It's almost all of us, not wearing my Metro Board hat that have to decide that. So I think we need to have kind of begin that real discussion within our jurisdictions first, and then together to try to figure this out.
and it's going to take the business community too. And, all the meetings that Paul and I have had and others have had, regardless of where they are on the political spectrum and how they do or don't feel about WMATA, they all understand that the metro system is the lifeblood of this region in terms of its economic success. And they're not going to walk away from that investment. They get it. How we end up ultimately getting there, who knows? But they all understand that drive out your way. I mean, that would not be there without Metro. This area here would not be here without Metro. Amazon wouldn't have come to this region without Metro. I mean, people understand the importance of it. So, and they're not going to walk away from the investment. So,
To your question and attacking this, the second part of what you said, Walter, was, our chief administrative officers could do the research on other localities and how they're funding things. And I kind of felt like, Matt, your point of Nbtc's role, there's a board member role, and then there's a chair role, I think. And I feel like the board member role is first and might be Nbtc, and very difficult, NVRC or whatever, as far as the chair's role, those are probably just individual conversations. But it feels like that maybe splitting a little bit into some of the research questions that chief administrative officers might be tasked with, and then, some sort of structure to actualize those conversations without being so formal, because we all know that, right? When you get something done on a budget, it might be a 4-minute cup of coffee with a colleague, or, I just don't know how we propose to put into action exactly what you suggested, because I think we have to start. But I feel like there also ought to be enough structure so that we don't come in 3 months and say, oh, I had one conversation. You know, I don't know exactly how to structure it. Maybe Kate or the team or you know.
Yeah, I was gonna say, one of the things we might want to do is come back and have this at a future meeting and put it on the agenda, you know, with some potential action items coming out of that. Because I think there are some things we could do in our jurisdictions, probably some other things that BTC could do, but I think it'd be good to maybe tease those out before the next meeting.
You're way ahead of me. I just hadn't picked up on that.
Yeah, and we're, you know, I mean, and for us, it's complicated just because of what Andrew went over. You know, in the district, Mayor Bowser writes a check and signs it. Maryland, Governor Hogan, you know, says, make the transfer from the trust fund, you know, and they're done, essentially. So, you know, ours is always Virginia, way more complicated.
If I could, Mr. Chair, we have a model for doing this type of thing. Where we can absolutely get those jurisdictional staff together, we'll see some issues and present them to this committee. We somewhat had anticipated. So we rolled up our sleeves on this topic.
But it's going to be a lot of groups rolling up their sleeves.
Absolutely. If I could also add, we actually are in the process of one of the items that we hope to bring to the commission is to move forward on doing a recalculation of the value of Metro Rail to the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's a study that we did about 5 years ago. We're looking at those data. So we're talking about the economic value when to the Commonwealth, not just your local property tax revenues. And so when we did that study about 5 years ago, we found it was to the tune of about $600 million a year that was going down to Richmond to be distributed through income and sales tax. So we're planning on updating that study. Something a little bit later soon.
And I attended a meeting in 2016, early 16, on that very point at the Chamber of Commerce building in DC with the Board of Trade directors. Chuck Bean had people from all 3 jurisdictions there. I was kind of the token representative of small governments. But that was exactly the message, and particularly for Virginia. And quite frankly, all the eyes, the DC and Maryland eyes were on Virginia because we've got this Rube Goldberg political arrangement here in Virginia that they understood it, but they were patient with it, but it was a lot more challenging in some ways. And we got through that, but that's, as I said earlier, it's going to pale in comparison to what we're going to be facing this time.
Well, and let's not forget, you all may have other issues you're going to have to deal with depending on the outcome of, you know, the special session or whatever arrangement comes out of Richmond. So, correct. Or doesn't. Yeah.
Something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. No action could be bad too. Very bad.
Well, Andrew, another uplifting presentation.
This is why we scheduled another committee meeting.
So any other items, any other questions, comments on agenda item 4? All right, then let's run into 5, and some of this may be truncated. So
Yeah.
I've already gotten some good feedback from and comments and insights from our WMATA board members, but Paul, Matt, have anything else you want to provide, any updates?
You know, look, this, you know, obviously, you know, the 7,000 series issues continues to be, you know, frustrating. I think they are working, you know, as quickly and efficiently as they can to work through the list. There is no, you know, root cause yet, causes yet. So, you know, hopefully soon, and we'll have some update there. OIG, you know, HR matter, you know, we're moving on. The deputy IG has been appointed acting, and you things are moving forward nicely. Matt, do you want to talk about the blue orange?
Yeah, the only other thing I wanted to say just on the 7,000 series though first is just a reminder, because I see a lot of frustration about Metro not having identified a root cause, and obviously we're all very frustrated, but it is an NTSB investigation. Those folks are very good at what they do. So the lack of a root cause is not just from Metro, it's from the NTSB as well. And I think that's a point that's worth just underscoring, if nothing else, to demonstrate kind of the complexity and difficulty of that task.
And they did, and Matt, that is a good point. And they did issue a national alert to other systems that have similar cars and wheel sets.
Yeah. So related to the blue, orange, silver capacity study, I think most of you are familiar with it. We had a presentation about it. Some jurisdictions have been briefed about it. Metro is going to be starting up sort of another round of public comments. And I think, should we desire on the Virginia side to sort of speak with one voice, obviously all of us here at Nbtc would be the logical place to do that. I don't want to sort of lead the discussion too much with my own views, but I have said before that my preference would be for a focused look at the Roslyn Tunnel capacity issues exclusively, and what engineering and construction solutions would exist for those, and what that price tag would be. If you've been briefed on the blue, orange, silver capacity study, you know that it's a very expansive study. It has a lot of stuff in there. It speaks to a great deal of system expansion beyond the Roslyn Tunnel corridor. It's been made very clear to me and Paul and others that you can't simply address Roslyn Tunnel in a vacuum, that there are downstream impacts because of the lack of sort of storage capacity underground. So I understand it's not simple, but I also don't know that what we have in front of us in terms of this study, which was done pre-pandemic, so it really doesn't, in terms of meeting the moment, where it's kind of an odd timing, but it doesn't really get to, I think, the core issues that we're addressing. I have been told that this will probably be presented more as phases down the road, but I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, that perhaps we have some discussion about input as Virginia into this effort.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. I agree. I actually think the phasing discussion, I think, is helpful. I think it probably is important for Nbtc to weigh in on this and basically just make clear our priorities and what we see as important, particularly if WMATA is going to move forward with something on a phase basis. And I do like the idea of looking at the Roslyn Tunnel issue specifically as a first phase item. I think it's important to understand that this is not anything associated with additional lines or expansion. This is, we're really talking about full implementation of the system, at least when we get phase two open, as it's currently built. So this is, I think it's going to be important, setting aside down the road, orange line extension or whatever. It's important for other reasons. So yeah, I would suggest that maybe we maybe come up with some sort of a resolution or letter that we would circulate and get input from staff and jurisdictions.
Yeah, because Matt and I will need that support just to push staff along.
Yeah.
And just recognize, it isn't, as Walter said, it's not just for the bottlenecks and some of the things we have on our side here, which were occurring pre-pandemic already. Anyone who took the orange, the blue, the silver already knew the issues.
The orange
It is
crush.
the orange crush. It's for the entire system, not just Virginia. It's for the entire system.
Sure.
You can't manage the trains if you got problems with the bottleneck.
Yeah, and the system is so interconnected. Thank you for saying that, Paul. And let's also remember that people are not only riding from Virginia into the core, but people are coming out as well.
Well, that's another thing, how are people going to use Metro moving forward, particularly what's going on in Virginia? People are already using it for reverse commutes, or the typical, they're not everyone is coming to the core anymore.
Any other discussion, questions, comments on that idea in terms of weighing in on the BOS study?
I just want to add that at least as far as timing goes, we're not quite sure what the exact timing next steps are. I think we've done a number of these procedurally. I think so the committee's familiar with writing and reviewing letters, but we'll be in touch with Greg and work closely with you on what the exact timing is. We do have a committee meeting scheduled, but
look, we also got to be mindful of federal dollars that are sitting
Right.
there.
Right.
Absolutely.
And everyone from the smallest community to the largest communities of New York and Los Angeles are throwing in grants like no tomorrow.
And they're just for the discretionary.
Yes,
grants.
yes.
Yep.
So understand your point, but I think, who knows?
Yeah, and that's
And WMATA is working on a lot of grants, don't get me wrong, but
that's a great point, and
Yeah.
I know for many of those grants, they do require a certain amount of
yes.
analysis.
So the work they're doing is
to get ready.
absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah,
I think, WMATA traditionally does not fund these type of projects.
Right.
They're really funded by the jurisdiction. So
Yeah.
if we think about who would be actually seeking funding, it would be jurisdictions. So, maybe it's WMATA in this case, but we don't really have anything close to a product that would be able to get us to the point of being able to even, compete or make that kind of application. So I think
And that's why we gotta,
yeah, I think there's some urgency here. I think we really need to focus this discussion quickly, or we're going to miss this opportunity.
well, and it's in the interest of DC as well. And
The we is whatever the 3 or 4 of you tell us as to the when, Mr. Chair.
when could be quite soon,
Sure.
but I simply don't have enough certainty over timing to affirm exact next step.
So can we have a letter prepared for the next Nbtc meeting or even before? Is that possible?
I guess I want to make sure that we absolutely articulate the positions of the committee in that we go to commission meeting. And absolutely something that we can do. I think probably what will be helpful. Perhaps connecting that is making sure that we get the sense of the community or the message on that. We're not responding to like, here's a study with alternatives and this is what, this is more of a philosophical
Well,
letter.
yeah, and I think it's a prioritization. I think it's we support approaching this in a phased manner, and we strongly recommend that as a first phase, that the additional, basically the engineering be done.
It's a critical issue.
As a critical issue that affects the entire system, that independent of any system expansions, that needs,
Then,
that is a critical component.
Matt, when did we first, how long have they been talking about the Roslyn Tunnel? Probably before most of us were on this commission. Yeah, they've known it for a long time. So.
We're good. Okay.
All right, and I know some folks have to take off.
To
Anything else
MBTA.
before you leave?
Go to the MBTA now.
You got another one.
Transportation right now.
Okay,
Thanks, Mr.
thank you
Chair.
very much. Matt, Paul, anything else? Any other? Anything else? Okay, all right, good. Well, then let's move on to item number 6, Nbtc program updates. Ms. Mattice.
Thank you, Chair Osborne. We had an opportunity to do a shout out to Ramada earlier. We're actually more formally introducing Ramada Zacharias, who is the program to NBTC. She's actually been working with Andrew in a Ramada program throughout the last several months that she's been here. So, but she's also leading our coordination efforts on all of the yellow line bridge shutdown. Which is a major, she's coordinating. But we're really fortunate to have her facilitating this, and it's getting the right people at the table, making them accountable, and think through how we can move so many people during this really important time coming up. So she's got a slide deck and a little update to give us on that. So, yeah.
Just a quick overview. Next slide. So as many of you are aware of, part of Metro's capital project for 2022 includes work on the Potomac Yard track tie-in, as well as the Yellow Line Bridge and tunnel rehabilitation. So both of these projects are kicking off on September 10th. The purpose of the Potomac Yard station work is to tie in the station into the rest of the rail system. So that will also require a shutdown of all of the rail stations south of the airport. The project is set to take place for about 6 weeks, ending on October 22nd. For the Yellow Line Bridge and tunnel work, that project again is going to start on September 10th and run through spring 2023. And the focus really there is to work on repairs to stop water intrusion, as well as strengthen the tunnel's lining. So right now, Metro is estimating that that project will take about 7 to 8 months. Next slide. So NBTC has been supporting Metro and leading this effort, and we've been working closely with Greg on this. On our end, we've been meeting with local jurisdictions to get an understanding of what type of supplemental service they would be able to provide during this time, as well as meeting with DRP to understand funding opportunities available. And Metro actually held the first larger stakeholder meeting last March, and that included representatives from Northern Virginia as well as DC. And these meetings are going to go on monthly, and it's really going to be an opportunity for all of us to coordinate and report on progress during this planning study. So, well, planning work. In addition to that, there'll be 2 other groups. So there'll be the bus service planning group, which will focus on the bus shuttle service, as well as the public information officer group. So they'll focus on communication and outreach once we get that once Metro has the final plan finalized in early June. So following that plan being finalized, we'll bring this to the commission in July. And yeah, we'll be providing updates to you guys as we have. That's pretty much all for now.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate that update. Any questions on that? Any comments? Yeah, you want
That
And if I could, I
Any
believe our
G
July
rating
meetings, I think our July meetings are target to be really showing what plans are coming together. There's a lot of work going behind this.
project that just keeps on giving.
A lot of fire mitigation plans to dust off.
Well, I think the other thing that's good is that, VRE might be more of an option this go around too, so.
Yeah. And just, I mean, one thing that complicates it is you've got the CSX line, you've got other wires and whatever else is running along there. So it does complicate things, but, timing is just awful. Yeah.
All right, anything else on that uplifting? Okay, well, I believe that's it. We have nothing else on the agenda. And any other comments, items for the record?
I mean, Mr. Chair, maybe we should talk about international events as another uplifting topic. Sorry.
All right, well, very good. Well, the good news is we finished 20 minutes early. So with that, I'll call the meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Good.